Did medieval women have voices? Were they only property? Did they even have dreams of their own during the years 500 to 1500? Number 1. Myth medieval women were always seen as inherently inferior and weak. The idea that women were universally viewed as frail, easily manipulated, or less capable in the medieval world persists in many stories and textbooks. It is a persistent whisper that medieval society boxed women into a corner, labeling them as the weaker vessel and nothing more. This picture often fails to capture the intricate tapestry of roles, respect, and influence that women actually held in their communities, their families, and even on the grand stage of politics and economy. It is true that many theological and philosophical texts from the era often depicted women in a subordinate light, drawing on interpretations of religious scripture and ancient philosophers. Yet, the realities of daily life across the vast stretch of the Middle Ages, from the bustling cities to the quiet countryside, tell a much richer, more nuanced story. Take, for example, the sheer physical strength and resilience required of women in agricultural societies. Most people in the Middle Ages lived off the land. Women worked alongside men in the fields, plowing, sowing, harvesting, and threshing. The records from manorial estates across England and France show women performing demanding manual labor, from carrying heavy loads to shearing sheep. This was not light work. A woman's ability to contribute to the family's survival and prosperity through her physical labor was not just tolerated, it was absolutely essential. A family's ability to feed itself, to survive the winter, and to contribute to the Lord's coffers depended on the combined efforts of everyone, including the women. A weakened or incapable woman meant a significant blow to the household's economic stability. This practical reality often overshadowed any theoretical notions of feminine frailty. Historians studying peasant life point out that there was no room for abstract weakness when the harvest needed to be brought in or the animals tended. Consider the role of women in defending homes and castles. While men were often away fighting wars or hunting, women were left in charge of their estates. Chronicles from the Crusades tell of women like Sibylla of Jerusalem, who played a direct role in the defense of her kingdom, or noble women who oversaw the repairs and fortifications of their castles. The Countess of Montfort famously defended her castle of Hennebont in Brittany against siege forces in the 14th century, even leading a charge out of the gates herself. These were not isolated incidents. Medieval warfare often involved sieges, and it was not uncommon for a lady of the castle to be the one to direct the defense, organize the provisions, and command the remaining garrisons. Such acts of courage and strategic competence certainly defied any simple categorization of women as weak or incapable. Their leadership was not just tolerated, it was vital for survival. The reverence for the Virgin Mary, the mother of Jesus, stands as a powerful counter-narrative to the idea of universal female inferiority. Mary was revered throughout Christendom as a figure of purity, strength, compassion, and divine intervention. Cathedrals were dedicated to her. Countless artworks depicted her, and her cult was arguably the most widespread and fervent form of devotion. She was seen as an intercessor, a powerful figure who could influence God himself. This profound veneration of a female figure, often seen as humanity's most perfect example, complicates any blanket statement about women being inherently inferior. It reveals a capacity within medieval thought for profound respect and even adoration for the feminine. Furthermore, consider the specialized knowledge and authority held by women in areas like healing and midwifery. For centuries, women were the primary caregivers and medical practitioners within communities. They possessed extensive knowledge of herbs, remedies, and birthing practices passed down through generations. A skilled midwife or a wise woman healer was a respected and indispensable member of society. Their expertise was crucial for the health and survival of families and communities. Records of medieval villages and towns often mention female healers, who were compensated for their services, their skills valued, and relied upon by people from all walks of life. This demonstrates a practical recognition of women's competence and essential contributions, far removed from the theoretical weakness often attributed to them. The legal concept of the femme sole, a single woman who is legally independent, also challenges the notion of universal female subservience. In many legal systems, a widow or an unmarried woman had significant rights. She could own property, enter into contracts, sue and be sued, and conduct business in her own name. While a married woman, a femme covert, typically had her legal identity subsumed under her husband's, the existence and agency of the femme sole show that women were not inherently viewed as legal minors throughout their lives. A widow, especially one with children, often became the head of her household, managing estates, businesses, and family affairs with complete legal authority. Such a position required considerable strength, intelligence, and business acumen. The legal frameworks, while patriarchal in many ways, also carved out spaces where women could exercise considerable power and autonomy, directly contradicting a narrative of universal inherent weakness. Number 2, myth women had no voice or ability to express themselves. The notion that medieval women were silent, their thoughts and feelings lost to history, is a captivating but ultimately misleading idea. This perspective often suggests that women were either illiterate, too constrained by societal norms, or simply did not possess the means to articulate their experiences, beliefs, or desires. Yet, if one looks closely at the historical record, a vibrant tapestry of female voices emerges. These voices, while sometimes obscured by the passage of time or the filters of male-dominated historical narratives, speak through a variety of mediums, revealing rich interior lives and profound engagement with their world. One of the most striking examples of female expression comes from the realm of religious devotion. Medieval women, particularly those in convents or those leading spiritual lives outside traditional structures, found powerful avenues for expression. Hildegard of Bingen, a German abbess in the 12th century, stands as a towering figure. She not only wrote extensive theological treatises, scientific works, and medical texts, but she also composed original liturgical music, creating entire cycles of hymns and sequences. Her works reveal a powerful intellect and a deep spiritual vision. Hildegard also corresponded with popes, emperors, and kings, offering advice and even issuing stern rebukes, demonstrating an authoritative voice that commanded attention across Europe. Her detailed visions, which she painstakingly recorded, provide an unparalleled window into her inner world and spiritual convictions. Another powerful voice from a different context is Christine de Pizan, a writer living in France in the late 14th and early 15th centuries. She was arguably the first woman in Europe to earn a living solely from her writing. Christine challenged prevailing misogynistic views of her time, writing works like the Book of the City of Ladies, which celebrated famous and virtuous women throughout history. She argued passionately for women's intelligence and their right to education. Her extensive output of poetry, prose, and political commentary shows a woman deeply engaged with the intellectual and social debates of her era, unafraid to speak truth to power and advocate for her gender. Her writings provide direct access to a medieval woman's reasoned arguments and her frustration with the limited perceptions of her time. The autobiography of Marjorie Kempe, an English mystic from the 15th century, offers a unique and deeply personal form of female expression. Marjorie, a laywoman, dictated her life story, making it one of the earliest autobiographies in the English language. Her narrative details her spiritual struggles, her intense religious visions, her pilgrimages across Europe, and her often contentious interactions with church authorities and her own family. Marjorie's book is raw, emotional, and unapologetically centered on her own experiences. It reveals a woman determined to live a life of profound piety, even if it meant defying social conventions and enduring ridicule. Her voice is distinctive, sometimes frustrating but always authentic, giving us an unvarnished look at a medieval woman's inner world. Beyond famous figures, evidence of women's voices can be found in more subtle ways. Women were patrons of art and literature. Noblewomen commissioned manuscripts, tapestries, and illuminated texts, often influencing the themes and imagery. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for example, was a patron of troubadours and encouraged the development of courtly love literature. The choice of what to commission, what stories to tell, and what art to display served as a powerful form of expression, shaping the cultural landscape around them. Their names are often found in the dedications of books, or on the records of artistic commissions, indicating their active role in shaping medieval culture. Even more common avenues of expression existed in personal letters and wills. While not all women were literate, many were, particularly in urban settings or among the nobility. Letters exchanged between family members, friends, or even business associates provide intimate glimpses into women's daily lives, their concerns, their affections, and their opinions. The wills, too, served as a powerful form of expression, allowing women to dictate the distribution of their property, to make provisions for their loved ones, and to express their spiritual beliefs and desires for their own burials. These legal documents often reveal strong personalities and clear intentions, demonstrating agency and decisions that deeply affected their families and communities. Moreover, women often found collective voices in their communities. Beguinages, for example, were self-sufficient communities of laywomen that flourished in northern Europe from the 12th century onwards. These women chose to live together in piety without taking formal vows, supporting themselves through various crafts and charitable work. Within these communities, women created their own rules, managed their own affairs, and fostered environments where female spiritual and intellectual life could thrive. Their existence itself was an expression of agency and a collective voice demanding alternative ways of living outside conventional patriarchal structures. The very formation and success of these communities speak volumes about women's desire for autonomy and self-determination. Number 3, myth women had no political power or influence. The idea that medieval women were entirely excluded from the political arena, relegated to the background, and unable to shape the destinies of kingdoms or communities is a widespread misconception. This narrative suggests that power was strictly a male domain, with women having no say in governance, diplomacy, or war. Yet historical records tell a very different story, revealing numerous instances of women wielding significant political authority, both overtly and behind the scenes, across various levels of medieval society. Their influence was not merely a rare exception, it was a recurring feature of the political landscape. Your queens were arguably the most visible examples of female political power. While they were often consorts, many served as regents for their underage sons, effectively ruling kingdoms for years. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a 12th century figure, is a prime example. As Queen of France and later Queen of England, she was not just a figurehead. She actively participated in politics, advised her husbands, and even led her own court and government. She wielded enormous personal wealth and vast lands, which gave her significant leverage. She traveled with armies, negotiated treaties, and even played a direct role in the Third Crusade. Later in life, she governed England while her son Richard the Lionheart was on crusade and in captivity, demonstrating astute political skill and administrative capacity. Her long and eventful life shows a woman deeply entrenched in the highest levels of European politics. Another powerful queen regent was Blanche of Castile, who governed France for her son Louis IX in the 13th century. She was known for her formidable intellect and unwavering will. Blanche suppressed a baronial revolt, managed the kingdom's finances, and even negotiated the end of the Albigensian Crusade. She was a shrewd politician and a capable administrator, ensuring the stability and prosperity of France during her regency. Her son, even after coming of age, continued to rely on her counsel. Such regencies were not merely symbolic. They involved direct rule, decision-making, and the exercise of royal authority. These women commanded armies, raised taxes, dispensed justice, and engaged in complex diplomacy, all hallmarks of significant political power. Beyond queens, abbesses held immense political and economic power within their own domains. These heads of large monastic institutions often governed vast estates, sometimes encompassing entire towns and villages. Abbesses, like those of Gandersheim or Quedlinburg in Germany, were effectively feudal lords. They commanded vassals, collected rents and taxes, held courts of justice, and even minted their own coins. They participated in imperial assemblies and had direct access to emperors and popes. Their positions were not just spiritual, they were intensely political and economic, giving them a voice and a vote in regional and even national affairs. These women managed complex administrative systems and wielded authority over numerous people and significant resources. Noblewomen, even without the title of queen or abbess, exerted considerable influence. When their husbands were away on crusade, at war, or at court, noblewomen were often left in charge of managing their vast estates. This involved overseeing agricultural production, collecting revenues, administering justice on their lands, and even defending their castles against attack. Their economic power and ability to maintain the stability of their households gave them considerable social and political leverage within their local regions. They often served as informal mediators in local disputes, built alliances through marriage negotiations, and protected their family's interests. Records of their financial dealings and legal disputes demonstrate their active engagement in the secular world of power and property. Women also influenced politics through less formal channels. They acted as powerful intercessors, using their relationships with kings, lords, and church officials to advocate for individuals, families, or causes. A queen could lobby her husband for a particular policy. A noblewoman could influence a legal decision, or a high-ranking court lady could promote a favored candidate for office. Their personal connections, social standing, and access to decision-makers gave them a unique form of indirect power, often shaping outcomes without holding a formal title. These networks of influence were vital in medieval political systems, and women were often at their very heart. Finally, even within urban settings, women in merchant families often played a significant role in the family business, which could translate into civic influence. While not always holding formal political office, a wealthy merchant's wife might oversee the shop, manage accounts, and maintain business relationships. The economic power accumulated by such families could lead to influence in city councils or guilds, even if it was exerted through male relatives. The involvement of women in the economic life of medieval towns meant they were not entirely separate from the forces that shaped urban politics and power. Their ability to manage, trade, and invest contributed to the overall well-being and power dynamics of their cities. Number 4. Myth marriage was always forced and without choice. The popular image of medieval marriage often involves a young woman, tears streaming down her face, being dragged to the altar to marry an old, undesirable man chosen entirely by her father. This narrative, while rooted in some historical realities, dramatically oversimplifies a complex social and legal institution. While medieval marriages were indeed often arranged, particularly among the nobility and wealthy merchants, the concept of choice or consent was not entirely absent. It varied greatly by social class, region, and even by the specific legal and religious frameworks in place. Church law, which held significant sway across medieval Europe, actually required mutual consent for a marriage to be considered valid. This meant that both the man and the woman had to verbally agree to the union. While societal pressure and parental authority were immense, especially for noble families, where alliances and property were at stake, a forced marriage could theoretically be annulled if it could be proven that one party did not truly consent. Cases exist in ecclesiastical court records where women and men successfully petitioned for annulment on the grounds of lack of consent. This legal requirement, though often a formality, still offered a slender thread of agency to individuals. Among the peasantry, marriages were often arranged by families, but the practicalities of rural life sometimes allowed for more personal interaction. Young people often worked together, and marriages might be more informal in their initial stages, or at least less about grand dynastic alliances and more about combining labor and land. While parental approval was still crucial for land inheritance and community standing, young people might have had more opportunities to express preferences or even to resist particularly unappealing matches. The notion of a couple simply handfasting or promising themselves to each other was also a recognized, albeit less formal, way to begin a union, particularly before formal church blessings became universally mandatory. For widows, the situation was often remarkably different. A widow, especially one who had inherited property or dower rights, typically had far greater freedom in choosing a second husband. She was no longer under the legal guardianship of her father or first husband. Her property made her an attractive match, but it also gave her leverage. She could often negotiate terms that benefited her and her children. Many widows actively managed their own estates and businesses, and their choice of a new spouse was often a strategic decision for their own interests, not just dictated by family. Records show widows choosing partners from different social classes or making unions based on personal affection, a freedom rarely seen in first marriages. The financial negotiations surrounding marriage were also complex and often involved the bride's family exerting significant influence. The dowry, which was the property or money the bride brought to the marriage, and the dower, the portion of the husband's property set aside for his wife's support in widowhood, were critical components of the marriage contract. These negotiations could be protracted and fiercely contested. A bride's family could use the dowry as leverage to secure better terms for their daughter, including provisions for her well-being, her children, or even her right to manage certain assets. This indirect financial agency gave the bride's family, and by extension sometimes the bride herself, a degree of influence over the shape of her future. While elopement was a dangerous and often socially condemned act, its existence points to the fact that individuals, including women, sometimes defied parental arrangements. Stories and court records occasionally mention young couples running off to marry without parental consent. While such marriages might face legal challenges and social stigma, they illustrate a desperate form of individual choice. These acts, though risky and rare, undermine the idea that all marriages were passively accepted and demonstrate a human desire for autonomy, even in the face of severe consequences. The very need for laws and social norms to control marriage suggests that people were always pushing against the boundaries. Finally, the concept of romantic love, while perhaps not the primary driver of marriage, was not entirely absent from medieval society. Courtly love literature, while idealized, certainly celebrated passionate affection. Personal letters and other documents occasionally hint at genuine affection and personal preference, playing a role in marital decisions, particularly after the initial arrangements were made or in less rigid social strata. While the grand, sweeping narrative of love-based marriage is a much later invention, the human element of attraction and companionship was certainly a factor, and women were not entirely immune to its influence when making their marital choices, even if those choices were severely constrained by the realities of their time. Number 5. Myth women were uneducated and illiterate. The common perception of medieval women often casts them as universally unlettered, confined to a domestic sphere where intellectual pursuits were irrelevant or forbidden. This picture, often drawn from generalized ideas about a largely illiterate society, fails to acknowledge the significant variations in education and literacy among medieval women. Their access to knowledge, reading, and writing depended heavily on their social class, geographical location, and the specific institutions they were connected to. While mass literacy as we know it did not exist, a surprising number of women, from noblewomen to nuns to urban merchants, were indeed educated, and many were highly literate. Among the nobility, it was common for girls to receive an education that went beyond simple household management. Noblewomen were often taught to read and write, not just in their vernacular language, but sometimes in Latin, the language of scholarship and the church. If this education was practical, they needed to be able to manage vast estates, keep accounts, read letters, and understand legal documents. A noblewoman might also be expected to read religious texts, direct household servants, and entertain guests with refined conversation. The education of figures like Eleanor of Aquitaine or Joan of Navarre, who owned a substantial library, highlights that for many high-born women, literacy was a social and administrative necessity, not a luxury. They often had tutors or received instruction within their parents' or guardians' households. Nunneries were arguably the most important centers of female education and scholarship in the Middle Ages. For women who chose a monastic life, education was often a core component of their spiritual and administrative duties. Nuns learned to read, write, and copy manuscripts. Many convents maintained impressive libraries, and some became renowned for their intellectual pursuits. And figures like Hrotsvit of Gandersheim, a 10th century German canoness, wrote plays, poems, and historical works in Latin, making her one of the earliest known female dramatists in Western Europe. Hildegard of Bingen, mentioned earlier, is another powerful example of a nun who was a prolific writer, composer, and intellectual. These women were not just literate, they were scholars, theologians, and artists, pushing the boundaries of knowledge within their religious communities. In urban centers, particularly among merchant and artisan families, literacy was often a practical skill for women involved in business. A merchant's wife might be responsible for managing the family's shop, keeping accounts, writing letters to suppliers, and overseeing transactions. Business records from cities like Florence and Paris show women engaging in complex financial dealings that would have required basic literacy and numeracy. They were not merely passive recipients of goods, but active participants in the economic life of the city. For example, records of women running taverns, bakeries, or textile businesses frequently reveal their ability to read and write. For these women, literacy was a tool for economic survival and prosperity. Even outside the elite or monastic spheres, a certain level of literacy was often valued for religious devotion. Many women, regardless of their social standing, owned prayer books, psalters, or books of hours. While some might have relied on others to read to them, the widespread demand for these personalized devotional texts suggests that a significant number of women could read them for themselves. These books often contained beautiful illustrations and personal prayers, indicating a deeply personal engagement with the written word. For these women, literacy was a pathway to deeper spiritual connection and personal piety. Furthermore, women themselves sometimes served as educators. There are records of women running small schools, particularly for young girls, teaching basic reading, writing, and arithmetic. Others served as tutors within wealthy households. This implies a cycle where literate women were not just consumers of knowledge, but also active participants in its transmission. The existence of these female educators demonstrates that the skills of reading and writing were not exclusively guarded by men or institutions, but were also passed down and cultivated by women themselves within various social contexts. This nuanced reality shows that medieval women were far from universally uneducated. Their access to knowledge was diverse and often substantial. Number 6. Myth women had no legal rights. A common misconception about medieval women is that they were entirely devoid of legal rights, existing solely as property of their fathers or husbands, with no ability to own, inherit, or engage in legal proceedings. This idea often paints a picture of complete legal subjugation, where women were perpetual minors in the eyes of the law. While medieval legal systems were indeed patriarchal and women's rights were often mediated through male relatives, a closer look reveals that women possessed a surprising array of legal capacities that allowed them to exert significant agency within their societies. Their legal status was complex, varied by region and social class, and allowed for more autonomy than often assumed. One of the most significant legal rights for women in many medieval societies was the ability to inherit property. While male primogeniture inheritance by the eldest son was common, particularly for large feudal holdings, women often inherited land and other assets in the absence of male heirs. While daughters could inherit if there were no sons, and widows typically held dower rights, which granted them a portion of their husband's property for their lifetime support. This dower land often gave widows considerable economic independence and legal standing. Records from England, for example, show countless cases of widows managing vast estates, overseeing tenants, and defending their property rights in court. Their ability to control land provided a direct source of power and influence. Women also had the right to sue and be sued in court. This meant they could initiate legal proceedings to protect their interests, claim debts, or defend themselves against accusations. Court records, from manorial courts to royal courts, contain numerous instances of women appearing as litigants, witnesses, or even plaintiffs. For example, in England, the common law allowed for women to bring various kinds of actions, especially if they were widows or unmarried. While a married woman's legal identity was often subsumed under her husband's, a concept known as femme covert, even in these cases, her husband often represented her interests, which implies she still had interests that needed legal protection. The very act of a woman engaging with the legal system, even through a representative, shows an active participation in her own legal fate. Furthermore, women could enter into contracts, a fundamental aspect of legal agency. This was particularly true for unmarried women known as femme sole and widows. These women could buy and sell property, borrow and lend money, and engage in business agreements. In urban centers, women who ran businesses such as alewives, bakers, or textile workers regularly entered into contracts for supplies, sales, and labor. Charity guild records often show women as active members, abiding by guild rules, and participating in their economic activities, all of which required legal contractual capacity. Their ability to manage their own financial affairs and conduct business underscores their capacity for independent legal action. Women also served as executors of wills, a position of considerable trust and legal authority. As executors, they were responsible for carrying out the deceased's wishes, distributing property, and managing debts. This role required legal knowledge and the ability to navigate complex financial and family matters. Many wills name wives, mothers, or daughters as executors, demonstrating the high level of trust placed in their legal and administrative capabilities. The act of acting as an executor gave women direct control over significant assets and required interaction with legal officials, further illustrating their active role in the legal landscape. In certain specific contexts, women even had roles in local governance or legal administration. While formal roles were rare, examples exist of women serving as bailiffs for their estates or as jurors in specific cases, particularly those involving women or children. While not widespread, these instances reveal that the legal system was not entirely closed off to female participation. Moreover, women often played a crucial role in providing testimony in courts, particularly in cases involving domestic disputes, crimes, or property boundaries. Their eyewitness accounts and sworn statements were taken seriously, indicating their voices carried weight within the legal process. The diverse legal roles held by medieval women challenged the simple notion of their complete legal powerlessness. Number 7, myth women were always confined to the home. The idea that medieval women were perpetually confined to the domestic sphere, their lives circumscribed solely by household chores and child-rearing, is one of the most stubborn and pervasive myths about the Middle Ages. This image often conjures up a picture of women cloistered away, rarely venturing beyond their front doors, especially if they belong to the upper classes. However, historical records, archaeological findings, and artistic depictions overwhelmingly demonstrate that women across all social strata were deeply involved in a wide array of activities outside the immediate confines of their homes, contributing significantly to the economic, social, and cultural fabric of their communities. Their lives were active, diverse, and often involved substantial public engagement. In the vast agrarian society that was medieval Europe, women were indispensable to agricultural production. They worked side by side with men in the fields, engaging in demanding physical labor. Records from manorial estates show women participating in planting, harvesting, weeding, and threshing grain. They tended livestock, milked cows, sheared sheep, and processed agricultural products. Women were also responsible for the household garden, providing essential vegetables and herbs. Their labor was not just supplementary, it was fundamental to the survival and prosperity of peasant families. Without their relentless work in the fields and barns, entire communities would have struggled to produce enough food to survive. This meant spending countless hours outdoors, often far from the immediate dwelling. In towns and cities, women were highly visible and active participants in the urban economy. They ran businesses, worked in various trades, and dominated certain industries. Women were commonly brewers of ale, bakers of bread, and spinners and weavers of textiles. Many women operated stalls in public markets, selling produce, dairy products, and crafts. They were innkeepers, shopkeepers, laundresses, and street vendors. Guild records across Europe show women as members of various guilds, sometimes even as master craftswomen. For example, in Paris, women were prominent in the silk industry, and in London, female brewers were a major force in the economy. These occupations required daily engagement with the public, managing finances, interacting with customers and suppliers, and navigating the bustling urban environment. Their workplaces were often public spaces, and their contributions were vital to the urban economy. Even noblewomen, despite their higher status, were not always confined to the inner chambers of their castles. While they oversaw large households and managed numerous servants, they also had significant administrative responsibilities. Noblewomen often managed the family estates, especially when their husbands were away at war, on pilgrimage, or at court. This involved traveling across their lands, inspecting properties, collecting rents, and overseeing agricultural production. They might visit local towns, engage with tenants, and even oversee the construction or repair of buildings. These were not sedentary roles, but active management positions that required mobility and public presence. Noblewomen also frequently accompanied their husbands on journeys, to court, or even on crusades, making them active participants in the wider political and social world. Religious life also provided women with significant public roles. Nuns lived in communities, often with extensive lands and properties, and engaged in a variety of activities beyond prayer. Abbesses, as discussed earlier, managed vast estates, interacted with secular authorities, and sometimes even held court. The nuns were also involved in charitable work, tending to the sick, assisting the poor, and providing education, which brought them into contact with a wider community. Even laywomen who chose spiritual paths often embarked on pilgrimages, sometimes traveling vast distances to holy sites, engaging with diverse groups of people along the way. Marjorie Kempy's detailed account of her pilgrimages across Europe and the Holy Land clearly demonstrates a woman not confined to her home, but actively engaged with the world beyond it. Finally, social gatherings, public festivities, and legal proceedings also drew women out of the home. Women attended markets, church services, and various communal celebrations. They participated in processions, fairs, and feasts. They also appeared in courts, either as plaintiffs, defendants, or witnesses, engaging directly with the legal system in public forums. These activities, whether economic, religious, or social, placed women squarely in the public eye and required their active participation. The idea of medieval women being hidden away is largely a modern construct that fails to capture the dynamic and essential roles they played in shaping the medieval world.